A small crowd of around 20 protesters picketed Macquarie Street, hoping people power would persuade the Transport Minister to reconsider the closure. But Mr Baird was tied up with parliamentary duties, and the group had to settle for opposition politicians Merv Hunter and John Price to take their complaints. The Toronto Rail protest group says 400 people will suffer if the 4-kilometre line goes. While City Rail will replace the service with a bus link, the commuters believe travel times will increase dramatically. Spokesperson Lila Kolink says it's a government cop-out.
They're taking a public service that belongs to the public and handing it over bit by bit to private enterprise, and already country areas that have had their rail services replaced by buses have now begun to lose their buses as well.
City Rail has estimated the Toronto Fassifern line loses more than $1 million each year. General Manager John Zantiotis says government services must become more economical. The line will be closed in less than 2 weeks. Peter Ryan, NBN News.
A quiet chat over tea and scones hid the serious nature of the business ahead as potential buyers and the curious gathered in the auction rooms. The turnout was small. Initially, 30 parties had shown interest when word got out that the prestigious St Albans Without was on the market. In recent weeks, though, that dwindled to just a handful, among them several Sydney-siders as well as a few locals. If there was a nostalgic note to today's sale, it was that it effectively saw the end of one of Scone's grandest rural properties. Once almost 3,000 acres, St Albans Without was renowned for its prowess in the thoroughbred and cattle breeding industries. Today it was carved up to go into the auctioneer's hammer in 4 separate lots. In fact, according to locals, it was the second great tragedy to have befallen the property since it was bought at auction in 1984 by Sydney businessman Alan Walden for just over $3 million. Then it had boasted a residence little short of magnificent. A talking piece for locals, it had once been used to entertain the King of Sweden. But just months after the sale, it was bulldozed to the ground. It wasn't to Mr Walden's taste. Still today, the site stands empty. Instead, a modern homestead was built nearby. That made up the centrepiece of the main block, still titled St Albans Without, to be sold today. Bidding opened at $1 million and it was slow throughout, with 3 parties involved. When it stopped at $2,450,000, a quick vendor conference was called before the decision was made to sell. The buyer was listed as Scone Abattoir. He was unwilling to talk other than to say he was happy with the price. 2 further blocks, Taylor's and Highway, sold for $580,000 and $190,000 respectively. A 4th, Cameron's, was passed in at $850,000. All buyers were local, a pleasing aspect for auctioneer Bill Rose.
It shows faith in the area by the local people. Fundamentally the rural economy is quite sound, quite good at the moment. Clearly interest rates at their current levels are not helping, but the rural sector is probably looking a lot better than share markets or the horse game or anything else. The sheep and cattle are quite good.
With the federal election little more than a fortnight away, last night's meeting at the Newcastle Tattersalls Club had unmistakable political overtones. Donning their familiar white smock jackets, pharmacists from throughout the Hunter joined their staff and families to pledge their support to a campaign they say will hit the Hawke government where it hurts most, through its voters. From now right up to March 24, they'll be using every spare moment to canvass the homes of Newcastle, Lake Macquarie and Valley residents to protest the government's plans to reduce dispensing fees by 23%.
Obviously there's a limited number of pharmacists and there's a limited period of time before the elections. We've really only got 2 clear weekends. We intend to use both of those weekends before the election, and it appears if we have the logistics and the manpower, or man and woman power, we're going to use our members to help polling in the polling booths on the election day on the 24th of March.
As well as a string of speakers from within the pharmaceutical industry, last night's meeting also included addresses from a Democrat senator and a Democrat candidate, who the chemists have vowed to support in the upcoming election.
This gathering in Adamstown was one of more than 100 meetings across the country, all linked by satellite. The teachers nationally lodged their refusal to accept higher salaries as a trade-off for poorer working conditions and lower educational standards. Last year, after a package of industrial action, the teachers received a 3% wage increase. Now they want pay hikes of up to 15%.
What we're saying to state and federal governments is that they believe that the economy of Australia can only be restructured by having a sound education base, then teachers need to be paid a sound wage.
The meeting launched an all-states campaign with a special timetable for national salary claims. The claims include new pay scales and promotional ladders. While no strike action is planned, teachers today agreed to lobby members of Parliament.
The contract is part of the massive North West Shelf natural gas project. The international consortium managing the job wants 5 platforms built, each the height of a 6-storey building. The work is worth $500 million. For 2 years, a consortium headed by locally based Alco Steel has worked to secure 2 of those platforms. Until now, it believed it was winning.
The market for engineering for the offshore oil and gas industry is estimated between now and the year 2000 to be around about $1 billion per annum. So it's very important.
An estimated 500 new jobs would be created if the contract came to Newcastle, but even more importantly, it could be the start of a whole new industry and probably finally put the Old State dockyard site to good use, as the consortium says that would be the best place to do the job. However, with the contract award just a month away, Glenn Turner believes Newcastle has been pipped at the post by a cheaper bid from Korea. He says Alco's offer is as low as it can be, but it is almost impossible to compete with Asian industries' cheaper labour prices. The Newcastle bid is also inflated by one-off costs, such as building facilities and importing technical expertise.
If you want this kind of industry in Australia, you have to recognise that it takes us a little while to get up and get going and be that competitive.
Metal workers' unions have reacted quickly to the news that the contract may go overseas. Local FIA spokesperson Mark Stoker says the government must step in to stop it. The towers will be assembled in Western Australia, and Mr Stoker says if they are built in Korea, a black ban may be put on that work. Election campaigns are not all hard work. The Defence Minister's weeks of handshaking are being eased by the use of one of the government's new French executive jets. Mr Beasley's is being well used. Weeper this morning, an hour at Williamtown and then on to Canberra. This wasn't an electioneering stop. The media weren't even invited. According to the Minister's department, it was simply a chance for him to be brought up to date with Fighter World. The enterprise, which will house a range of moving and fixed displays, will cost $3.2 million. So far, $1.1 million has been raised, allowing the idea to start to take shape. Private companies are being asked to sponsor different displays. Although he didn't offer to help fill the empty spaces today, Mr Beasley was impressed.
I think it will join the list of numerous tourist attractions that there are here in Newcastle for population, not only the New South Wales area but for the country as a whole.
Gabriel Marie Leslie, aged 30, and David Leslie Bowers, 45, died after a ballooning accident at Lovedale on October 15 last year. Mrs Leslie was a passenger aboard the Joy flight, while Mr Bowers was the pilot of the ill-fated craft. Today, Coroner Darryl Field presided over an inquest into the tragedy at Cessnock Court. A series of witnesses told how the balloon collided with power lines in clear, near-still conditions. Evidence was called from each of the passengers on board the craft. Husband and wife Lindsay and Donna Ellison said the pilot told passengers to get ready to jump as the balloon ascended. Mr Ellison was the first to do so while the balloon was still above ground. Then 3 more passengers, including the dead woman's husband, also got out. But as the balloon ascended, Mrs Leslie was still on board. Eyewitness Thomas Robertson told the court he saw the balloon clear the power lines when it first landed. He said the vessel drifted back into the wires after 4 passengers disembarked. He said there was a red flash and a pinging noise, then the balloon drifted off. Another on-ground witness saw the passengers scramble from the basket. Vicky Manuel said the balloon then just seemed to shoot up into the air. It looked like a fire coming out of it, and the lady was still in there. Passengers said they saw the pilot being dragged by the balloon with a rope or strap around his wrists. Later evidence revealed a metallic fibre in the strap could have conducted a significant current. The court heard medical evidence that Mr Bowers' injuries were consistent with a large electric shock, with death almost certainly instantaneous. The inquest will continue tomorrow. Leslie Robinson, NBN News.
It's been talked about along the coast for decades, and finally it's here. The 10-metre king prawn weighs 500 kilos thanks to some steel reinforcing inside its fiberglass shell. Big T Roadhouse operator Ian Taskett said he approached a local fiberglass firm with the idea about 6 weeks ago. Working from life, the manufacturers soon created the biggest addition to Australia's long list of giant tourist stoppers.
Preparations for the 1200-metre event began slowly as handlers saddled their hopes up. The race for 2-year-olds is one of the premier events on the local racing calendar, giving syndicates the opportunity to start the autumn season on a strong foot. So the sound of tactical whispers filled the air as the jockeys left the change room to meet with their mounts' trainers. Broadmeadow trainer Terry Ryan told local jockey Robert Thompson to stay warm with Hold the Ice, while the 12 other contenders filed out under the Penfold shoe on their way to the barrier. As they rounded the bend, there was plenty of nervous tension in the trainer's stand.
They approach the 300. Dan Zabella's the leader. The bullfighter challenges from Signal. Out wide is Western Settlers Cove. I don't think can win. Accessible running on, but the bullfighter took the lead as they approach the 100 and looks to have the Penfolds Classic safely in his keeping. And the bullfighter careers away to take out the 1990 Penfolds Classic. Second home was Dan Zabel. Third, Faith in Marie.
Winning trainer Jeff Main says it was a good run back from injury for the bullfighter.
He ran in the Breeders' Plate and he pulled up a little bit shin sore after that, and we turned him out, and he's come back bigger and better than ever. He ran a good second first up at Randwick, and this is his second run from the spell.
Going to put him in the slipper now?
I'd say so. We'll probably have a go at the Brambles now. Like, that'll get us in the... They'll pay. He's not nominated in the slipper, so we'll either have to win the Brambles or pay the $75,000.
And on the TAB, the winner Bullfighter paid $11.70 and $2.90, while the trifecta on numbers 7 and 8 paid $201.80.
There's no shortage of moral support for our school athletes, but that doesn't pay the bills. Today, in a national first, Hunter Fresh Produce donated $5,000 to primary school sports and another $5,000 to the high schools.
The state bodies have had sponsorships, but they've been for specific sports. This one is for all sports within the region.
Local schools send more than 40 representative teams to meets each year. The sponsorship will help ease financial strains on contestants and their families. Money much appreciated by champions like 13-year-old Philippa Reeves, today competing in the Hunter swimming trials, preparing for the New South Wales High School Championships. 180 swimmers were selected today, including 19 from Maitland High, 16 from Newcastle, 15 from Warners Bay and 10 from Dungog.
Towering seas whipped up by a 100km/h easterly forced rescuers to call back emergency vessels. Instead, searchers could only stand on the shore while police and media helicopters combed the area. Putty Beach off Budai National Park was littered with flotsam from the yacht, which apparently developed engine trouble at about midday. The vessel's last terrible minutes were watched by a local man, Jim Mercer. He says locals often look out for vessels in trouble, but this was the worst episode he'd reported.
Yeah, well, the boat was going from north to south and apparently got into some engine trouble. Came backwards onto the bombora and rolled over a couple of times, and next thing it went along the wash and then in against the rocks and smashed up.
At first it was thought the mystery yacht was called the Cassandra due to life vests bearing that name, but police inquiries have established the yacht was the Island Girl out of Pittwater yesterday, bound for Queensland.
We're not sure who was on board at the moment. We do know there was a male adult. We have confirmed that there's one person on board.
Do you hold out much hope of their survival?
Well, naturally in situations like this we always hold out hope, but this is not looking very good at the moment at all.
The vessel remains mostly intact, pinned beneath the water against a rocky outcrop, and with no sign of a survivor, it's thought the missing yachtsman might be trapped there as well. Late today, searchers were being organised to comb the beach for more wreckage and possibly the missing crewman, although hopes of finding him alive have all but disappeared. Tom Hilston, NBN News.
The local company was successful in defeating renowned European operators for the $3.5 million contract to refit the 45,000-tonne bulk carrier. The ship will carry more than half its weight in sugar and have nearly 3 kilometres of conveyor belts installed, carrying the white crystal through various stages of weighing and packaging. The system saves on handling, cargo loss through damaged packets and spillage. Previously, sugar was shipped to a port where it was unloaded, packaged and stored. It was reloaded to be freighted to its marketplace. The Bud Pack system allows the sugar to be loaded in bulk and packaged on the same ship. The ship won't do any packaging until it ties up alongside a wharf like this vessel. It will then produce 300 tonne of packaged sugar ready to be loaded onto the backs of trucks and taken to market. Managing Director Bob Brooks says while the installation work will be carried out in Italy and not Newcastle, local industries will still benefit.
The basis of Bud Pack's work is that we we subcontract the manufacture of the component parts out to local engineering houses. So the flow on to these people will be enormous.
Tenders for the local engineering components are expected to be called early next month. The ship will load in France and deliver its sweet cargo to Africa and the Middle East.
The delegation is sponsored through the United Nations Development Programme, with participants coming from India, Pakistan, the Philippines, Thailand, Korea and China. The visiting executives come to the Hunter Valley in Queensland in a flying one-week visit to see firsthand the latest technology in the coal industry. Power generation consumes 80% of coal used in Asia. Countries like the Philippines blend Australian coal. Malaysia imports all its requirements from Australia. Even China, which mines 1,000 million tonnes of its own, is a big customer of our coking coal.
Well, China produces more coal than any other country on earth, but it also imports coal, and Australia is a major supplier. We supply nearly 100% of China's coal imports. It's a producer of steaming coal, but it's an importer of coking coal. And we also supply China with a great deal of technology from Australia. And in this way, our engineering and consultancy sectors benefit a good deal from exposure to what we have to offer.
While the program is designed to provide aid, assistance and technology transfer from Australia to Asian neighbours, a profitable spin-off is the development of business contacts for major joint projects of the future. John Church, NBN News. At 2 a.m. on the 8th of March 1954, 160 soldiers and reservists took to the water in 20 amphibious vehicles. It was all part of an exercise organised by the Northern River Lancers. The Army Ducks and LVTs, basically floating tanks, were to sail north to Morna Point and take part in a camp at Gangan in Port Stephens. Although the weather was clear when they started out, it soon turned bad, with a southerly whipping up large seas. 8 of the 20 vehicles sank. 10 troopers were admitted to hospital for treatment, 2 drowned, a third is still missing, presumed drowned. Those killed were remembered at Civic Park today. About 40 of the survivors of that fateful night showed their respects by lowering the flag to half-mast. Captain Grimmond from the 16th Transport Company laid a wreath at the memorial. The tragedy has changed the way the Australian Navy now operates its amphibious fleet. But today, the ex-servicemen who gathered in the park were mindful that bravery and courage were the only things which prevented the death toll on that night from being much higher.
It was local people, it wasn't people from outside the area. Those that lost their lives were local people, and I think it's very important that we should always remember those people that have paid the sacrifice to help keep Australia the way it is today.
It was a dispute that by late this afternoon was on the brink of turning lethal. Huge mounds of contaminated linen and waste had for 2 days running been left to fester on the grounds of the 9 Newcastle and Lower Hunter hospitals affected by the walkout. At Royal Newcastle, piles of filthy linen were being bundled into a lorry, sealed tight, and then simply left to await collection. Ironically, a private contractor, the cause of the whole dispute, had to be called in to dispose of the waste. The 6,900 workers, members of the Health and Research Employees Association, and staged the 48-hour strike after hearing Hunter laundry and incinerator services had been contracted out. Yesterday, that escalated into an angry protest, with workers clashing with Hunter Area Health Service Chief Executive Officer Dr. Owen James. In Sydney, the matter went before the Industrial Relations Commission. One of the key recommendations to come out of that was that the H&REA beef out skeleton staff levels it had been maintaining throughout the dispute. Royal Newcastle had been left with only 12 staff. Dr. James said that was almost half the recommended levels of the Victorian branch of the union. However, Dr. James said the union had stood by its plans to stage the strike over only 48 hours, and that meant all staff would be back on duty by midnight tonight. In the meantime, hospitals will continue to run on skeleton staff, using the efforts of medical students and volunteers to help on the wards and in the kitchens.